I'd like to welcome everyone. I'm Harley Shaken, the chair of the Center for Latin American Studies, and I'd like to welcome everyone on behalf of the Berkeley Law School and the Center for Latin American Studies, who are the co-sponsors both of this event and of the 2-week stay President Ricardo Lagos has had in Berkeley. We're very honored and very pleased he's been with us for these 2 weeks, teaching a special seminar, and that he's with us tonight to speak about a memoir about the future. He needs no introduction to this audience, but I'd like to very briefly say he is someone who is a distinguished scholar, who has spent a lifetime working towards democratic values, democratic government, and social justice, and he is someone who was a transformative president of Chile. The format tonight will be that he will speak about a memoir about the future, which is in fact about his new book, The Southern Tiger, which is that memoir. And then we look forward to a conversation with you, to questions from the audience. This will be on the website of the Center for Latin American Studies early next week, clas.berkeley.edu. The earlier event he did this week with Robert Reich on inequality, that, both the tape and the highlights are already up. I'd like to recognize Rolando Ortega, who is the Consul General of Chile, who is with us tonight, and who has been a good friend of Berkeley and of the center. But there is something I'd like to read from The Southern Tiger, which really is one of the best introductions of Ricardo Lagos that I've seen, and it in fact is from the foreword by Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton concludes that foreword by describing him in the following way. Even when imprisoned by the junta, Ricardo Lagos's grace and optimism never faded. His courage was steadfast, and importantly, more importantly, his vision for a better country did not waver. His is a remarkable story, and like Chile's, it's not over yet. Please join me in welcoming Ricardo Lagos.
Thank you, Harley, for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to present some ideas about what was the so-called memoir. But let me tell you that I tried to translate what memoir means. This is not exactly a memory of my administration or what I have done in public life. I think that some time will be in order to write that in a more academic way. What I have here is just some glimpses of part of very recent Chilean history in which I was involved. And needless to say, I'm not extremely happy with the title of the book. Among other things, because I thought that if the title was The Southern Tiger by Ricardo Lagos, more than one journalist may say, oh, this Lagos, it's impossible, you know. Now he thinks that he's a tiger. And this is the reason why then I had to put a subtitle, Chile's Fight for a Democratic and Prosperous Future, to make sure that the tiger, if there is any, at that time, was the Chilean people that was able to fight in order to recover democracy. The question was that when I was coming here, in addition to some classes that I have to give, I had a wonderful experience sharing some thoughts with Robert Reich about inequality. And then, Harley, why don't you talk a little bit about the book? And I said, but what can I say about a book that is already written? And he is responsible for the title of this talk, A Memoir About the Future. Let me tell you that in this talk with Robert Reich, when I was going out, somebody from Chile approached me and said, so Lagos, now you are a poet. I say, why? Well, because I'm planning to talk about a memoir about the future. He thought that was extremely a poetic way of presenting some ideas. Nevertheless, let me tell you that what I keep thinking was, it's true. What I do have in that book is some glimpses about the past in Chile. But I think that from some glimpses, you can think a little bit about the future, not only of Chile, but also probably in some other countries. For instance, to a big extent, not the only reason, of course, the only cause, why there was such a coup in Chile. To what extent in 1970 or 1973 we end up in September 11? Because as you know, we also have a September 11 in Chile. And it seems to me that given the political evolution in Chile, what do we have was a right-wing president like Jorge Alessandri that was president of Chile from 58 to 64. Then we have another ideology coming, and was the Christian Democrats for President Frey from 64 to 1970. And then, once that the Chilean people tried with a right-wing solution, somebody can say a centrist solution with the Christian Democrats, and finally, a leftist solution with Salvador Allende, you have a country extremely divided by ideology. Until what extent, when politics is only ideology, that means that politics is not going to be a field where some kind of compromise is possible. If I believe in my own ideology, all of you that has different ideologies, you are in the wrong side. And I have to defeat you. And not only defeat you in the ballot box, your ideology has to be defeated because it's so different from mine. And I don't think that it's possible to live in a democratic society. I need that you need ideas. You need principles. Yes, ideology, why not? But understanding that the truth of your ideology ends when beginning the truth of the other ideology in the other side. And if this is the case, then it's going to be very difficult, because it's only my truth is the only one. Then in the long run, probably, it's going to be extremely difficult for a society like that, for a people like that, to be able to talk to each other. In short, I'm not saying that it was the only reason for the coup d'etat in Chile. There are many reasons. Some of them, all of us know, has to do with this country and the way that this country thought that what was going on in Chile was not the right thing to allow to the Chileans to do it. It was the time of the Cold War. Either you are with me or against me. And other thing was also our own mistakes. It's so difficult to have very deep changes like the one that we wanted to do when you don't have enough majority in your own country. There are many reasons. Nevertheless, I think, and why I say this? Because the first time I arrived to the United States was in 1961, the last days of Eisenhower, right before Kennedy was going to be the next president. And let me tell you, during all those years coming and going from Chile to the United States and vice versa, I had never seen a society that is becoming much more polarized than this American society today. I was used to have Republicans that were rather conservatives and liberals, like Nelson Rockefeller, or Democrats that were extremely liberals and others extremely conservatives. And that when you have votes, especially in the upper chamber, among senators, you have some kind of people more aligned rather than Democrats and Republicans, more aligned than conservatives or liberals from both parties. And what you can see today is an extremely polarized society. And I wonder if this is the right way to run a democratic country like the one that you have. So I thought that ideologies are extremely important. In politics, you need to have principles, values, and you have to believe in those. If you dare to fight, as I did fight, to be president of Chile, it's because you have an idea of a country that you want to fulfill. If you don't have principles, values, then what are you looking? The privilege of being a president? And therefore, I think that it's important, this kind of values and ideas and principles, but understanding that what you want to do has to be done with some other people. Therefore, that's my first thought about the future, that probably the coup, to some extent, was because of the ideology, and the ideology because of the Cold War and all those things that we know. The second point has to do how you're going to fight a dictatorship. And what I tried to present in the book was that it's so difficult to know what is the right track to do that. There is not a blueprint how you're going to do it. There is no a particular way. And at the very end, it was so clear, after 10 years of dictatorship in Chile, that the military were firmly entrenched in power. And therefore, when there was a go down in the Chilean economy and some national protests emerged, then some small opening took place. The trade unions were the first to attempt a general strike. And I remember so well talking with the leaders of the trade unions and telling them, but do you think it's possible to have a general strike in the middle of a dictatorship? When you have more than 20 or 25% of unemployment and you're going to risk your jobs? Until what extent is possible to think some other ways to protest? And this is like the first protest emerged. And at the beginning, the trade union leaders say, no, we wanted to do the other way. And then you have different ways trying to think, how are you going to be able to defeat a dictatorship? And of course, the first thing was to say Pinochet's resignation, constitutional assembly, and number 3, provisional government. Tremendous goals, extremely difficult to fulfill. And as the movement goes on, the idea of how you're going to have a pacific and non-violent way to resist a dictatorship. I remember that in 1974, Gandhi's movie was projected in Chile's cinema. And that Gandhi's movie, we went to see with my wife that movie in a cinema, typical cinema place in a middle-class neighborhood. And at the end of the movie, people keep clapping. It was a very moving experience. And could you repeat Gandhi's experience trying to resist and defeat the British Empire? How is it possible to walk toward the ocean because the salt mines has to be nationalized? But that was very difficult. And the question was, that on the other hand, some people say, look, you will never defeat a dictatorship because they have the military strength, other than using weapons to defeat a military means. And this was a tremendous discussion, an everyday discussion. And I remember when in 1983 there was this opening, the Socialist Party asked me to be the representative of the party in the first political arrangement, the Alianza Democrática, Democratic Alliance. And that means then to go open, trying to fight with Pinochet. That was a particular moment, not a very easy one. But then the question of what road, what path is going to be better, it was in everyday discussion during those days. I remember what happened in the Philippines with President Marcos, the dictator, being defeated. And that presented some light, that it's possible sometimes through a plebiscite to do that. And then arrived 1986. And 1986, everybody used to call the decisive year. Some of us thought that that was the last chance to defeat Pinochet through mobilization and make compulsory for him to resign. Because if we didn't able to do that, then a plebiscite was in the horizon, according to Pinochet's constitution. Because, let's say things as they were, the decision of Pinochet in 1980 constitution was that he was going to remain in power for 16 years. And the Ministry of Interior at that time said, but don't you think 16 years is too much? Why don't you have in the middle a plebiscite? So we can say that the first president, Pinochet, is going to remain in power only 8 years, and after that, the military junta will propose a name for a second plebiscite. And then that was an opening. And the opening was, well, if there is going to be a plebiscite, if for the first time we know what road is the road that Pinochet has to walk through in order to remain in power, we can prepare now to defeat in that road. And this is like the process of using what at the end we defeated Pinochet with a paper and a pencil, which is not true because mobilization was before, tremendous effort were before. Nevertheless, I think that's why I say this is as a lesson for the future. Because it's quite different to defeat a dictatorship fighting like in a civil war, if that is possible, and what you will have later is going to be a military regime, at least to begin with, before going back to a democratic way. But here it was that when we say, look, we are going to register as citizens, and as citizens we will defeat Pinochet, it was very difficult to convince the Chilean people that was possible. Do you really believe that a dictator is going to leave power because somebody said no to him? And this was really then a question of saying, that depends on you. Because in a plebiscite, if you are sure that you are going to be there to count the votes, then you can defeat them. But that was a process of education, that was a process of discussion, that was a very difficult one. Needless to say that also the international community played an important role. Needless to say that the United States changed in '85 with George Shultz. Before that, the United States was of Pinochet. The Cold War was much more important. And that was simply because they thought that probably you had a democratic country being, a democratic credential being established in Argentina, something in early '85 in Uruguay, and Brazil was moving to a more democratic society. The mood were changing, and I think then that the United States bet that it's better to be in favor of democratic forces. So the international community was important, and the international community went for a plebiscite. What I'm trying to say is, it seems to me that when you are going to go from a dictatorship to a democracy, the way that you do that is going to be a lesson for the future, not only for Chile, but it's much easier to restore democratic values after. Third point, much more difficult. Third point has to do with today's Chile. Because you see in the news what's going on, not only among students, but beyond that, the degree of insatisfaction in Chilean society. And let me tell you that if you have been in government for 20 years, if you have been able, I like to say, to change the country. Change the country because it's different in the country when you have a $5,000 per capita income than when you have a $15,000 or $18,000 per capita income. Change the country because it's different when you have a country with 40 or 45% of people living under the poverty line, or you have a country of 11 or 14% people living under the poverty line. It's different in a country when you have 200,000 students at the tertiary level, university level, if in 20 years you have 1,100,000. It's different in a country when out of 10 university students, 7 is first generation in the university. The only problem that in the meanwhile, you have to pay tuition. Tuition is extremely expensive, and you don't have money. But then, that family that considered that their children were able to reach finally the university, what society is this? That I have not enough money to pay for tuition. I don't like this society, the way it's organized. In other words, it's so difficult for the political elite to understand that the agenda that you have 20 years ago, because was to a big extent successful in terms that you change the country, that means that you have to change the agenda, you have to change the tools that you are using, you have to change the different elements that you have. And it seems to me that what you have now in Chile is that it's the end of a political, an economic, and a social, and even cultural cycle in Chilean society. Political, because there was to some extent an implicit arrangement that we were able to change a lot of things in Pinochet's constitution with only one exception, the electoral system. And the electoral system means that in every district you elect 2 people. And if you elect 2, with 60% you elect 1, with 40% you elect the other. And therefore, normal things in Chile, given this electoral system, there are 2 huge coalitions, 1 and 1. If you add the second point that has been impossible to change, which is the quorum in parliament, you have a very close 1 and 1, plus quorums. And that means then that in practical terms, there has been a veto power for those that are a minority during many years. And that, I think, has to be over, and you have to change the electoral system. It's very difficult to change an electoral system when those that have to change the system are those that are sitting in parliament. Of course. But this is a tremendous challenge. And I say, look, this arrangement has to be changed. It's not possible to run a country during 20 years, and during 18 of those 20 years, the coalition that won has no majority in parliament. During my 6-year term, I never had majority in the upper chamber, never. But that was the arrangement, and that political arrangement, I say, is over. Number two, from the economic point of view, if you are a country of $5,000 per capita income, the most important thing is to have growth. And to make sure that once that you have growth, part of that growth will go to better schools, better primary health care center, better housing, better social and economic indicators to improve the standard of living. But all of us know that when you are approaching the $20,000 per capita income, much more important than per capita income is the income distribution. And Chile is approaching a stage like any other Latin American countries, like Argentina, like Uruguay, like Brazil, a little bit later, but a couple of years more than Chile, like Mexico, like Peru, like Colombia. All those countries are having a very rapid growth, nothing to do with what's going on in the developed world today. And therefore, the question is, what kind of society are we going to have in terms of income distribution? And this is going to be the big issue during the next period of time. So if you talk me about an agenda for the future, I would say income distribution is going to be the #1 issue in the economic policies. And if we're talking about social issues, it's one thing to defeat poverty, and you are very proud because now poverty has been reduced, but those that are not living under the poverty anymore, they wanted to have a different system. They feel an emerging middle class, and the emerging middle class has another agenda. And the first point of the agenda, I want that my kids are able to go whatever they want to go, which is not the thing. And the question you will see in the rest of Latin American countries, the question of emerging middle class are going to be the most decisive issue with regard to the future. And if we are talking about cultural values, well, Chile is a much more mature society than we used to be. You can say, for instance, why is that the 30th anniversary of the coup d'etat in 2003, Chileans were able to see on TV those views of the coup that had never been presented on TV before. We're much mature. Or the fact that finally in 2003 or 2004, finally Chile has a divorce law. Or the fact that it was possible to move the frontiers of what is possible to reach in cultural terms, to say no to the death penalty and to abrogate that, to say no to the censure of films, to say no to some kind of, it was possible to open spaces to freedom beyond what you consider was possible or feasible. But much more important than that, people, and not only in Chile, feel much more empowered than before. And this is a tremendous change in today's democratic societies, that because of Twitter, because of Facebook, you are making a talk like the one we are doing here, and this is being transmitted, and people is tweeting about what a stupid thing saying Mr. Lagos. and that's the way it is. There's a huge change in terms of how our democracy is going to work in the future. And therefore, when you have some sort of malaise in Chilean society, it's not only in Chilean society. The Occupy in Wall Street, or the 99% movements in this country, it's an amazing movement, quite sophisticated, you know, to understand why I should belong to the 99 instead of the 1%. Because now everybody will tell you that 9% in the United States used to have, as Robert Reich remembered to all of us the other day, that 1% used to have about 9% or 8% of the national income in the United States, and now the 1% has close to 23. Wow, in just 30 years. But if everybody knows these figures so that you can have a 99%, then you're living in a different country, in a different society. And that society is going to demand much more. And how the political elite is going to answer, how much representation we will have, and how much participation the people will be asking in the near future. And this is why I think then that it's quite important what I'm trying to explain this in the book. What are the challenges that we have with regard to the future? And this is why I thought that was a good idea to talk this about the memoir about the future. And in the epilogue, I quote the former president of Colombia, Belisario Betancourt. I was candidate for president, and we were in Guadalajara for the book fair, and in an incredible evening with Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Carlos Fuentes, among others, Belisario Betancourt, when I arrived there, say, Ricardo, I have a wonderful news for you. I thought that he was going to tell me that I have new partisans of my next running for president. But he said, I have a wonderful news, you know. What is that, I say? There is life after being president. And then he said, but now I have to give you a bad news. First, you have to be president. And I have remember, and I have told Belisario Betancourt about what he told me on that occasion, and said, yes, you were right. There is life after being president. There is life after you have been the honor of serving your country. The problem that in Latin America, some colleagues of mine apparently doesn't know that there is life after being president and try to keep being reelected one and so over. But other than that, I say, yes, Betancourt is right. There is life after being president. There is life that allows you to spend 12 beautiful days here with my wife in Berkeley campus and having a chance to talk with students, talk with members of the faculty, and to end up talking about a memoir about the future. But trying also to say that, yes, I think that when you are running or you are involved in public office, this is because you have some idea how society should be molded in the future. In short, politics is about the future. Politics is thinking ahead. How would you like to mold society? Because society should not be formed or molded according to market forces, but according to citizens' wishes. And this is what really a democracy is. And therefore the question is how we're going to be able to have a better future. It's true. That better future, as I used to say once, there is no tomorrow without yesterday. And therefore, if you wanted to have tomorrow, you have to look what you accomplished and what you did not accomplish. What was your success and what was your failure, as in any human work. But all this has only sense if this is going to be something for the future. And I hope then that this memoir, these glimpses about what happened while I was participating in public life in Chile, it may be useful also to think Chile's future. What should be our agenda? But let me tell you, the more we advance, it seems to me that our agenda is going to be very much like the agenda that you here in the United States are discussing, or the agenda that our friends in Europe are discussing. And that agenda has to deal with how are we going to live in a more democratic way, where everybody has a chance to think that society is a society where everybody is happy to live in. Because we don't like to live in a society where, depending where you are born, people we can say, where are you going to die? So my friends, I hope that this memoir may be useful to think about the future. If this is the case, well, I think that even though a memoir is about the past, it's part of the human being to know the past, to have a better future. Thank you very much for being here with me today.
Thank you very much, President Lagos. Now we're going to be able to have a dialogue with you, but I would like to recognize two very special people. Luisa Duran, who has made this long, courageous journey with Ricardo Lagos, who's here with us. And Dean Chris Edley of the law school, who has not been able to be with us tonight, but who played, as I mentioned earlier, about the law school, a very important role in this visit to Berkeley. So with that, are there any questions? Yes. Did everyone hear that in the back? No. It was, how do you, what is the role of education in creating a more equal society, and how do you support it?
Yeah, how do you see the role of society, or the role of education in creating a more equal society as it becomes harder for people to afford it?
Well, I think that education is the major engine of social mobility in any society. And then the big issue is that with regard to education, if you don't take specific measures, will reproduce the inequities that exist in any society. There is such a close correlation between the socioeconomic groups and the performing of those students belonging to those different groups. And I can give you just two figures. In 1990s Chile, 40% of students belonging to the 20% of the upper income groups were at the university. Only 4% of the lowest 20% income groups were at the university. 4 versus 40. 20 years later, you have 60% of the upper income and 16% of the lower income. So you went from 4 to 16. You could be very proud of the accomplishment, but still, you know, the distance is so huge. And then the question is, how are you going to be able to make for the difference? And that's the only way is to discriminate. in favor of those that have less. I remember I was the first Minister of Education right after Pinochet, of President Elwin. And Chile had 9,000 public primary schools. There is a national test of quality being taken in Chile, and we took the 900 worst performing schools, and we established a program, the so-called the 900 school, and to that 900 worst performing school, we provide full breakfast and lunch, we provide special libraries, we provide on-the-job training for teachers, we provide later on what we call a library for the classroom, modest 30 or 40 books for the classroom. And very important, an assistant to work with the worst performing student in those schools. It was at the beginning a huge discussion on that. At the end, everybody accepted the idea. Second, you pay to schools for those attending schools through a voucher system. We introduced a different voucher depending where those schools are located in order to differentiate the amount of money that you give them. After saying all this, still unfairness exists in Chilean educational system. A huge discussion is going on now with regard to private schools and private universities, and what of those universities can be or cannot be for profit. And if universities can be for profit, shouldn't that universities pay taxes as any other business and not be free of taxes? Or if you are going to use some tax money for the private university, that means taxpayer money. That means, don't you think that those universities should have some general standards, like an equal opportunity employer in the United States? In short, the big discussion now in Chile with regard to education is not only, as I say this morning with some students that I talk, that go from evolution in education for a revolution in education, because you need changes much rapid today. And I think that that's the only way, and you have to understand what's going on with what today's student movement in Chile. That, by the way, I would say it's not only a student movement, also the fathers and mothers of those students. I mean, it's a much more wider movement. Yeah.
Yes.
Hi. For about the past 10 years, social networking sites like Facebook and MySpace have increased the ability of populations to interact and have kind of quickened the exchange of ideas and different movements, like political movements, as we've seen with the Arab Spring in the Mideast. How has this impacted political advocacy, I guess, in Chile specifically? And do you see any increased exchange of ideas or any increased, interactions with Chileans? And how has that surfaced in Chile?
What did you say exactly?
The role of social media in terms of political activism. He explained how this has been such a force globally. How would you say this works in Chile? The influence and impact in Chile.
Well, I think that the social media, if you mean to the traditional media, this is papers, newspapers, radios, TV, well, I wouldn't say this is a very personal opinion. I would say that pluralism is extremely big in Chile. I would rather think that it's rather short. Nevertheless, it's through the new social networking, internet and the others, where I think that social media is becoming more and more important. I wish when we were fighting against Pinochet to have Twitter to call to a gathering tomorrow, you know? I remember I was in a press conference and somebody says, I have a question for you. I say, where are you from? I'm from the New York Times. And I say, I'm sorry, but I would rather prefer to have some times closer to Chile because most of the media was not going to publish what I was going to tell them, you know, at that time. So I think that what you have in today's movement, to a big extent, is because of this new way to communicate to each other. Last year, the students used to have manifestations every Thursday, and for some reasons, the authority decided not to authorize a new march of students for next Thursday. And when was this officially told to the students, the leader of the students on Twitter say, tonight we have to bump pot and casseroles in order to protest. And that was enough. Everybody was protesting that night, you know. I mean, to have that answer is something impossible to think before. Now, media is very important. The only problem is that for the time being, media is not going to replace that at the very end, you have to be looking face to face. I mean, you have to go to Tahrir Square in Cairo. And therefore, there is a moment when all of us are going to be there counting to each other. And I think that this is what is really new in today's world. If you want to talk about the Arab Spring, well, the Arab Spring is simply because you have this new media. And this social media, I think, let me put this. I have the sense that we are in a huge wave, but probably the wave is still forming. We don't know how it's going to be when the wave finally touches the ocean. It took 200 years after Gutenberg discovered the press to produce book that somebody thought that was possible to produce a newspaper. And because you produce a newspaper, then somebody thought that it was possible to have something called a democratic society. I'm sure that Gutenberg never thought that because he was inventing the press was going to end up 300 or 400 years later thinking that it's possible to have a democratic system of government. What is going to be, you know, we are in the middle. Things now is very happy, it's very, goes so fast. So probably this is not going to take 200 years, but still we are in the middle of the way. That's my impression, yeah.
I can't resist to say that we encourage you to friend the Center for Latin American Studies and our Facebook site and our website and our email. We have time for one more quick question. Yes.
Thank you, Presidente Lagos. My question is, the contemporary geopolitical map of Latin America has seen the emergence of two major trading blocs or common markets, Mercosur and the Alianza del Pacífico, the Pacific Alliance. Do you see, and this is a part of the crystal ball I'm going to ask you to look in for your memoir of the future, do you foresee a division occurring between what some economists consider to be the free market-driven Pacific Alliance and what some economists consider to be the state-driven, perhaps even protectionist Mercosur? If there is a division occurring, what role does UNASUR, the Union of South American Nations, have to play in merging these two blocs in order to ensure continued prosperity in the region? Well,
it seems to me that in the long run, there is going to be just one Latin America. And it seemed to me that the fact that you had the so-called Alliance of the Pacific, well, it's a wrong way to think that Alliance of the Pacific belongs to the countries that are facing the Pacific. It seems to me that in the long run, the new map is going to be how Latin America is going to use the fact that we are now facing that the 21st century is going to be the century of the Pacific Rim, which is wider. If you think, for instance, that right after the Second World War, what you have was a North Atlantic alliance, United States, Europe, and you have the Marshall Plan and all those things. And then you have a defense, like a North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But look, in that North Atlantic alliance, you have Italy. And as far as I know of geography, Italy has nothing to do with Atlantic. And then you include Turkey. My goodness, Turkey is far away. And then right after the Berlin Wall collapsed, you have quite a number of Eastern European countries in the North Atlantic alliance. In short, it seems to me that the big challenge is how are we going to use looking to the Pacific. Now, it's true, a country like Chile, far away, down in the south, no? And far away from the Atlantic Alliance, well, for the first time, we feel that we are in the first row of history, looking to the Pacific. But the question is, how are we going to include in the Pacific Alliance those that are looking for the Atlantic? Because they also would like to be close to what is going to be the major engine. I wonder if you have read the Kissinger book on China. And Kissinger's book on China presents something very interesting. He said, look, this is the first time that there's going to be a movement from the power number one to another power. The difference is that in the past you go from country to countries, and now for the first time it's going to be a change in power from a country that is a continent to another country that is a continent. And number two, for the first time, it's a change in civilization. When you went from Spain to France, from France to UK, or from UK to United States, it's the Western civilization. But from the point of view of China or India, they were the number one during 18 centuries in terms of economic production. And it was only because of the Industrial Revolution that the West became the number one. And for China today to be the number one again is simply going back to normal. It's another way to think, you know. And it's going back to normal because they are also used to measure by millenniums the time. Here, centuries is more than enough. We are proud 200 years of independence. I remember I was talking with Jiang Zemin, and to ask something, I say, Mr. President, I have been traveling around different provinces of China, and excuse me my ignorance, you have 32 provinces today. Since when? And Jiang Zemin said to me, well, you know, in the 2nd century before Christ, in the dynasty or emperor of so and so, he decided to have 30 provinces in order to unify China. And since those days, we have been able to add 2 more provinces. What could I say after that, can you see? So when you have this transfer of power, it's also a transfer of many things, you know. But after saying that, I would say, look, if it is possible for what Kissinger is thinking in some sort of trans-Pacific alliance between United States and China. And he thinks that some buffer state may be useful to make sure that it's not going to be a very rapid confrontation. And he said that Korea, Vietnam, Australia, Thailand, Indonesia, and somebody else should be part of that. And I say, why not Latin America? Why we cannot be part of that that Pacific Alliance and to be some sort of a buffer state? But if we want to have weight in international affairs, I want to have Brazil here and Mexico also. And in short, why I say this? Because in today's world, map change so fast. Let me tell you this. The post-Panamax ships take only 2 more days to reach China if they sail from Sao Paulo, Brazil, or Buenos Aires, Argentina. And 2 more days is nothing in terms of money. In short, Valparaíso, Callao, or Los Angeles or San Francisco is not a huge difference in time with those that are in the other part of the, you see? In the past, of course, was a tremendous difference, but not anymore. So the fact that we are facing the Pacific doesn't mean that we have a particular privilege. And therefore, I think that it's one thing to talk about the Atlantic of the Pacific in terms of countries that are a little bit more open in terms of trade. But that, I would say, have much more to do with the idea that one size doesn't fit all. If you are a huge country like Brazil, you defend your internal market. You are in a small country like Chile, well, we thought that it's better to be much more open and to compete abroad. And therefore, I would say, but if you wanted to have weight in world affairs, to discuss what about trade, what about international financial architecture, what about security, what about migration, what about drugs. Globalization is here to stay. We are not going to change that. Globalization may have a very bright future or dark future, depending who puts the rules of the game. And if we want to have a little bit to do with the rules of the game, better we try to have a much stronger bloc of Latin American countries. That would be my answer.
With that, I want to thank once again Luisa Duran and Ricardo Lagos for being with us tonight and for these 2 weeks in Berkeley, and thank all of you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.